In fact, I think you were quite right in announcing the fact that I hadn't intended to come to London when I left New York some 5 weeks ago. And it was only after spending 2.5 weeks in Japan that I thought it might be possible for me to come here. And so I want to tell you it's a pleasure to be here. And I hadn't intended originally to show any of my own work, but I was asked to do so. And so I'm going to just show very briefly some of the things that I was thinking about and some of the things that I was working on when I wrote the brief for the Shinkenchiku residential design competition, which will be the second part of my discussion here this afternoon. Rather than making it really a lecture, I'd like to try and solicit the participation of some of the people who are here, who took part in the competition, and who I hope I'll be able to show you slides of their work. I don't know what the slides are like. I just received them last night from a courier from Tokyo. Arata Isazaki brought them with him, and as I was putting them into the carousel, some of them weren't too familiar to me. The first ones, at least I know what they are. But some of these are my notes from the 5 days of judging there. So the first part, if we could have the slides, I wanted to show you some housing. No, not the, I'm sorry. When I was here last, I showed my houses, and I talked about them in quite a lot of detail, perhaps too much so, because when I left, I had the feeling I should never talk about the houses again. But just for the benefit of those of you who weren't here, this was a house in the Douglas House on the shores of Lake Michigan. Wrong one. And I also talked in some detail about the Aveti projects. These slides are of the Aveti Prototype, which was one of 15, which was to have been one of 15 mass-produced buildings to be built for the Aveti Corporation in various parts of the United States. None of them were built, and this was designed to sit on a flat site anywhere on a strip development. And then I went on and talked about Aveti, the one-off building for Aveti in Washington, D.C., which was for their area sales, the government sales, and the local sales office, as well as the service functions for office machines and computers. And the other Aveti project was a dormitory in Tarrytown, New York, on a one-sided sloping site, at which time I talked about Alto's MIT Baker House dormitory and the critical commentary that this building might be making on that one. But today I want to briefly talk about Twin Parks Northeast housing in the Bronx, which began shortly after I had completed the Westbeth artist housing. Westbeth was 13 interconnected buildings that used to belong to the Bell Telephone Company in West Greenwich Village. And it was a rehabilitation of those laboratories and offices for artist studios and residences, in which in 1968 we created loft-type spaces in which the residents could adapt the interior of the space to their own needs. So when we began Twin Parks for the Urban Development Corporation, it was hoped that some of the breakthroughs which we had made with the Federal Housing Authority in terms of eliminating their specifications for room sizes, size of closets, size of doors, location of hardware, etc., could be carried through into public housing for low and middle income people that were not of a, in a specific category, such as Westbeth was, everyone said, well, it's for artists, so you can do something there. And so we tried to carry through some of those ideas into Twin Parks, but we met with enormous opposition in terms of just making lofts in which people could then put in partitions and divide the space as they were. So these are pretty ordinary standard apartment units. The sites, and this is called scattered site housing, is on three pieces of 3 blocks in which there's a shift of grids from the south to the north. And what we tried to do was to recognize the grid to the south in the Bronx as well as the grid to the north, and create a series of buildings which made for a new open public space, a plaza over a car park area, in an area which was totally devoid of any open public space. So the new open space existed in relation to housing which is all around. Now, the study model shows one of the other things which we were trying to do, since the units kept getting smaller and smaller because the FHA maximum, or the FHA minimum room sizes became the UDC maximum allowable room sizes. So the one amenity that we felt we might achieve within the individual dwelling units was to give the maximum amount of light and air. And so in the model, you see the way in which it was designed in terms of the glazed surface to the solid surface. Of course, this is not the way it was built. We went through about 2 years of fighting, and finally, I won't go into the whole history of the way in which the UDC was organized and functioned, but the building contractor was in fact then the building's owner. He became the developer, and although one did working drawings and got all the approvals from the appropriate authorities, when it actually came to build the building, he said, well, I'm the owner and I'm going to build it the way I want, and if I don't want to make so much glass because people will break the glass, and operable windows are more difficult when they get to the size that you designed. And so the size of the windows diminished, and we went through a whole series of incidents where we quit, and we said, well, we wanted to see that it was done right. So they said, you can't quit, you have a contract to finish it. And this went back and forth. But the actual building, then the compromise was to make two brick courses greater in masonry and 2 brick courses less in glazed area. And the intention was really to have sort of a much more open feeling facade. Now, since this is what was called scattered site housing, all the existing buildings remained wherever they were on the site, and the building configuration kind of bent around and fit in, as it were. For the most part, the height and, not exactly, but is intended to repeat the height of the existing housing blocks in the vicinity. The color of the masonry, for the most part, is in keeping with the existing Bronx housing. And the building is raised on pilotis so that the new open space is really related not only for the people who live within the housing project, but the people who live around it as well. Because of the configurations which we get by the distortion based on relating to the grid to the south from the north, we pick up small pocket park areas which then relate not only to the new housing, but to housing across the street as well. I thought it was important to talk about this project because Twin Parks is not an architecture of isolated buildings, and it's related to ideas of traditional building and kind of preoccupation with urban continuity and also concepts of urban compatibility. And here the idea that each building is to be a thing unto itself and freestanding and separate has given way to a view that the principal role of building in urban milieu is to make some larger urban statement. And it seemed that when I was here last, everyone thought that really what I was preoccupied with was sort of this notion of making isolated elements on the landscape totally free from any notion of society. But in Twin Parks, there is as I said, an idea to adapt to and to reinforce the existing urban condition, and to use the new building as a device for talking about architectural ideas in relation to urban form. And here one's talking about ideas related to the surface, the nature of the surface, walls which are both thin and thick, a notion of arcade and priority of direction in terms of the new plaza area over the car park, which is below, and relations to the existing housing on all sides of the site.
Do you think you succeeded in this urban fabric?
Yes, I think that's the one area where it did succeed. Now, I might add that this point of shift in grids in the Bronx happened to be an area where to the south was predominantly a black and Puerto Rican area, and to the north was predominantly an old Italian residential community. And in the planning of this project, we met with community groups for quite a long time, which was representative of all of the community. But because of the nature of the financing and the method by which this project was built, you had to have a income which was less than most of the community to the north was making. Not that they were wealthy people, they weren't, they were laborers. But their annual income exceeded the limits set by the Federal Housing Authority. And therefore, for the most part, when the buildings were first occupied, it was occupied by welfare recipients and people who either had no income or who had minimal income, and for the most part, who were black and Puerto Rican. This created a certain tension, especially with youth gangs, who found that this new plaza space, this new open space, was an ideal battleground, and used it for their kind of gang warfare situation. And so at night, people would come in from the north and throw bottles with gasoline, and then the people from the south would retaliate. And so the people who lived there in the first few months were feeling somewhat isolated. They had come from outside the community, for the most part, and said, you know, what have we moved into? We don't want this kind of a situation where our park belongs to the community. We want it for ourselves, so we want fences to keep the community out. And we want a fortified enclave in order to have a place for ourselves. This is our place. It's not for everyone. And we fought against these fences, which in fact, you might see, these fences which were actually erected, you see the beginnings of them through here, then they were erected all the way through here. They've now since come down. The situation, of course, was a temporary one. It was one of claiming the turf everyone wanted to claim that turf as their own. And the situation still is not racially mixed housing as was originally intended because of the income situation, but the social problems which in fact it created were of a temporary nature. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. Well, I think that our intention was to go beyond what the sensibilities were of the day, to go beyond making a fortification, to suggest a better model, and perhaps to suggest what we thought might be, because we felt that unless we reached beyond what those sensibilities were today, and rather than saying that this is all that people are capable of coping with, then unless we aspire to something better, then there would be no function for us as architects. And I think that unless we make a stand on that ground, there will not be any function for us as architects. Now, the second project I'd like to show you quickly is something which is still under construction, and which is also for a state organization, Mental Hygiene Facilities Corporation of New York State. None of these state organizations exist any longer, or if they do, they don't have any building program. There are no social programs at all in the northeast portion of the United States, but there used to be. And this was called a school. In fact, it was partially a hospital and partially a school, and originally was designed for 750 residents. Of course, we knew at that time it would never accommodate the full residential population, and that in fact these two units would never be built. So it was designed for 6 residential units on one side of the courtyard in relation to the educational, therapeutic, and outpatient services and physical education and administrative spaces. In fact, the program was cut back for, for 380 residents, and there won't even be that number now, because much of this will be used for outpatient services as well. But what is now built are the 4 residential units, as well as all the outpatient, therapeutic, and educational services. The site is a kind of industrial, blighted no man's land, a kind of traffic islands with one side a large parkway, the Hudson River Parkway, another parkway to the north, the Penn Central Railroad tracks to the west, and an existing Bronx State Hospital to the south. So that the organization of the building in relation to the site is a kind of stepped echelon residential scheme in response to the highway triangulation of the site. And here in this photograph, one is standing on the bridge looking south at the building. It's still not completed. It's been going on now for 7 years. It'll be finished hopefully before this year ends. Now, the building, as I mentioned, is basically organized with a long building which has cafeteria, 3 points of entry, which then move through, 2 by bridges across the courtyards, and 1 through a bridge through the physical education facility and into the residential units. The building turns inward, as it were, into the courtyards, creating its own context. It's not like Twin Parks, because here there are no relevant architectural points. There's nothing to relate to. It's a building in isolation as it were. And so the context is one which it creates within itself, so that when people come out, they're not on the highway. There's this feeling that people are going to get killed by crossing the highway. That from the classrooms and the outdoor classroom areas, as well as from the residents, on 3 of the 4 floors, the handicapped and physically disabled can get to ground level by ramps. Sorry. Now, this is one of the residential units, and a view from the north with the support services spine then linked at the north end to the residential units. This is an axonometric of one residential unit, which is then divided with 4 levels, and within each level there is a kind of an apartment for 8 people, a two-bedroom, 4-bedroom, which is a kind of pinwheeling around a nurse's station, so that each of the 8 people have their own living room, bathrooms, and bedrooms. And then each of these 3 apartments for 8 makes 1 living unit for 24, which then has its own dining facilities, kitchen, and activity spaces. In this drawing, which is an axonometric cut through a portion of the support services spine, one sees, although I'm sorry, it's backwards, the cafeteria, which opens out into the northern courtyard, and a small house, which is a domestic training house. It's a place which has a bedroom, a sewing room, a kitchen, to simulate what a kind of normal, quote-unquote, environment might be, so that the people who come here, the residents who come either for a short time or even for a long time, can learn to function in the Bronx where they live. Most of the people would come from the Bronx and go back and live in their apartments with their families there. The residential units are also designed so that they can be used by families as a kind of overnight situation where families can come, stay with their children, and then return home, or that it can also be used for outpatient daycare clients as well. Well, the view from the highway, as well as from the northern side of the entry road, the main entry canopy, which then comes a bridge through to the residential buildings. Within the residential units, and this is looking out from one of the living rooms to one of the small residential courtyards, which you see here. The living rooms then are projected out so that there's a larger amount of glass in the living areas than there are in the bedroom spaces. And throughout the building, the aluminum panel curtain wall is designed to accommodate either the heating cooling unit or glass, so that at any time in the future, should a space need be changed in terms of its function, one just plugs in a new cooling heating unit and removes the glass. Views of the residential unit. The entry, which is through the existing grounds of the Bronx State Hospital, is by a service road which goes through the hospital grounds, and one comes up, parks a car, or comes up through, and this blank wall then sort of is of the gymnasium and indoor swimming pool and auditorium at one end.
Could I ask you, the residential units, why you chose aluminium panels, which seem to be the most inhuman thing for residential units?
Well, I guess that's a matter of opinion. The reason we chose the aluminum panel for the entire complex is that we wanted to create a new environment which had all the, since the program has all the aspects of a city. It has a place to live, a place to work, a place to go to school, a place for physical education, and that we felt that it wasn't necessary to differentiate the kind of material of the building to symbolize what that function is, since for the most part that function may change from one space to another in terms of the life of the building. But moreover, that we were interested in creating a center and a place which had a quality which we couldn't get with some other material. It also happened that this project of metal panel has this research into metal panel wall systems began with some of the earlier housing which we did for Aveti, and this was a natural development in terms of use of it. And in fact, the panel is really one panel. This is a view in the entry from in the main entry lobby through to the courtyard and residential units beyond. When I talk about residential units, you have to understand that there are also offices, classrooms, and staff spaces. I mean, it's not as though it's an apartment house in the true sense. It's really a hospital. Well, as I mentioned, the three bridges, one is glazed. At the north end, it's open, and one moves either across the bridges or through the courtyards from one side to another. The courtyard spaces, sorry. Oh, this is correct. The courtyard spaces are related to the ground level on the sports services side, which is 12 foot higher than on the lower side. There was a natural slope which we took advantage of in the site, so that at ground level here you come out and it's one level below ground level here, and then through ramps within the courtyard one can move through the courts. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Okay. The panel was originally designed to be fully glazed, gasketed, with inside finish to be shipped to the site as one 11-foot 6 by 12-foot panel. The unions, unfortunately, saw to it that we weren't able to do that and insisted that the glazers do it on the site, as well as the masons who did the sheetrock work. So what we were able to do was to take 3 of the panels, put them together, and ship them to the site as one unit, but without the full component as it was intended to be. Well, sorry. Hans showed you yesterday some of the drawings and plans for the museum in Florence at the Villa Strozzi. And I thought, since I managed to dig up 4 slides to show you a little bit more of that project. Hans Hollein had this side of the courtyard and a building which was L-shaped and wrapping around. Both buildings were designed by Giuseppe Poggi in the early 19th century, and these were used as stables. Of course, there wasn't really much worth saving, as you can see from the existing photographs, but the Superintendenza de Monuments insisted that parts of it be preserved. And so we both kept 2 outside walls, in this case, the front outside wall as well as the one side of the courtyard. And here a new structure is then built within the framework of those outside walls, taking the dimensions and the way of articulating this whole thing from the existing building. But in order to get 3 levels of gallery space within the stable buildings, we lifted the roof, the new roof, above the cornice line in order to be able to pull across and ramp up to a gallery space, which then continued to the 3rd level to keep the enclosure on the courtyard that had existed there with the stable buildings. When I was asked to be the judge and the jury for the Shinkenchiku competition in Tokyo, I was working on what's called an Atheneum. It's a visitor's center in New Harmony, Indiana. New Harmony is a town which was settled by first by the Rappites and then by Robert Owen in 1824 in southern Indiana, and is probably the only built utopian community in America. In 1825, there were about 950 people who lived there, and today the population is about 955. So it hasn't changed much in the last 150 years, except that it was a fairly poverty-stricken community. The farming, which was the basic occupation for most people, has gone bad, so that about 7 or 8 years ago, they realized that what they had and what was unique about it was that it hasn't changed very much. And from a tourist point of view, it was fairly interesting. A man came then to New Harmony with some funding from Ford Foundation and the Owens, and decided that saw the possibilities of kind of making a Williamsburg of the West, so that all of the existing houses were put back where they were originally if they'd been moved and restored. And although it's not like Williamsburg in that people walk around in costumes, people actually live there today and function there today in a normal manner. And the one new building which they needed was a visitor center. And so this building, which is just beginning construction now, is based on circulation because they expect 5,000 visitors a day to move through it to see a film on New Harmony and then take a walking tour of the town. Whether it will actually happen that way, we'll have to wait and see. At any rate, it exists on a plain with where the Wabash River bends around a cornfield, and one comes in and enters and buys your ticket to the film and the tour of the town and ramps up to a theater which is above this portion of the ground level and sees a 15-minute film on the history of New Harmony, goes through a number of exhibits which exist at the ground level and the upper level, and there's a rare books museum on the 3rd level, and then moves out past and this is the only plan I have with me, I'm sorry, moves out on a bridge past a restaurant where you can stop and have a Coke or something to eat, and begins a walking tour of New Harmony. There's an outdoor amphitheater which will have concerts and theater events overlooking the river. The study model then shows, although not the whole site relationships, movement through a kind of podium, place for outdoor picnics, entry from the car park into the building, up to the theater, which is above, across past the restaurant, and down through the town. since the numbers of people that will circulate into and through the building is pretty much undetermined, one can move out from any number of the exhibition spaces onto terraces overlooking the town and overlooking the river. And so at every level there are outdoor spaces from which to move from the building and through to the restaurant and to the town. Well, that's the first part, and that's where I was at when I started thinking about a program for the house at an intersection. And when I was thinking about it, I was also teaching at Yale, and at that time I gave a problem for a house, and I stated it very simply. I said, design a house for which there's no client and there's no site. Well, it took a long time for the students to be able to deal with that, but it provided a very fruitful discussion and probably the most rewarding term of teaching that I've ever had. The reaction was on the part of the students was terrific, and I thought that really what one should do when you can make a competition is not to make something for which people have to solve a particular problem, but you make a competition in which people can do something that they wanted to do and can find that this is a vehicle for allowing them to do something which they've wanted to do for a long time and might not otherwise have an opportunity to do. Could I just, before I talk about this, I'd like to just talk about, could we turn these off just for a minute? The house for an intersection was not meant for anything specific, and in fact, there were 549 entries which I saw. The 550th one arrived at the end of the day on the final fifth day of looking at all of the entries. I had asked to see it, but somehow never got to see it. So there were 550 entries, of which there were more than 150 from outside of Japan, which was for a Japan architect, something that they were very enthusiastic about. I think there were more than 50 from England, and it's only by coincidence that I'm here. Well, I don't know why that happened. But maybe we can find out. At any rate, there were the most interesting entries, by and large, were the foreign entries. I think that those people seemed to take it much more seriously. Also, for the most part, they seemed much much more thoughtful in terms of what they wanted to do. They weren't simply taking what I had written in the brief and trying to figure out, what would Richard Meier want to see, or what would Richard Meier like to see. They, for the most part, did what they thought they wanted to do. Many of the Japanese entries were from young students, I would imagine, by the quality of submission. Many young students entered it, and I think that historically it has been, over the past 11 years, very widely entered by young Japanese students. I was the first foreign architect invited to be the judge of this, and it was a strange experience for me. The last time I was a judge on a jury was 2 years ago, when I was asked by the American Institute of Architects to be on the National Honor Awards jury. And I did that, and I lost two very good friends in the process because they didn't receive awards. I said after that experience I would never be on another jury or be a judge again. I don't know why I accepted doing this, and I don't know how many friends I've lost, but I'm sure probably many. At any rate, it was a very rewarding experience for me, and probably the most interesting competition I've ever sat on, simply because of the variety of entrants and the kind of freedom which was possible in the way in which the program was stated. The winning entry, as I'm sure you all are very well aware of now, was by Peter Smithson, who did a yellow house. And if we can have the slides, I'd like to talk about that for a few minutes and then ask Peter if he'd like to say something about it in response. The yellow house has a site which was in a temperate country in the northern hemisphere on a typical inner suburb corner. And actually Peter wrote about 4 paragraphs, which I'd like to paraphrase a little bit, because it really took me 3 days until I started reading all of the competitions in terms of what was written. I first went through and just looked at the drawings, and then I realized that in some cases, because I felt that the drawings really should describe the entire project sufficiently. And in this case, I found that what was written just gave one a little bit more insight into the intention. And on this corner, which he selected, which dates from around the turn of the century, at a time before there were many cars, and before there was now a greater density of people and noise. There was just the wall and the corner and the tree. And the design was intended to give a greater degree of protection to the private domain, so that it could restore as far as possible the original quiet and privacy, and yet give more to the public domain than was there before. Because on this particular site, people tended to congregate at the corners for children to meet their friends, and visitors to look for street names or to wave for taxis, and for residents and dogs to chat with one another. So the design gives a tree-shaded spot for doing these things, a spot with a seat, with kickable tree roots bursting out from the surface of a grassy mound. Yet the meetings and the scramblings disturb the house very little. The house still commands the corner, not the corner of the house. The yellow house has its back to a thick protective wall, and its rooms face the track of the sun. Its layout puts the noisy elements of the plan, the stairs, kitchen, and bathrooms, on the wall side as further protection and distancing. I have some argument with stairs and kitchen being noisy, but that's a minor point. At any rate, maybe the machines and their ductwork do provide a certain amount of noise, and by being contained within that thick wall, are really away from the house. And the house, although it has a great deal of glass, has heavy floors and roof to store solar heat in the winter with insulation, and the solar heat is contained below the floor and above the roof. There's double glass against condensation and heat loss, and silvery curtains internally reflect back body heat at night. By day, the silvery curtains in the trees to the west would control late afternoon summer sun. There's an upper level, an east morning terrace, whose roof is tiled to let the sun in, and a western evening terrace to drink in the last sun of the day. The frame of the house is a hollow rolled steel section, which is supposed to be rust-proof, and which is lacquered yellow, as are the window frames inside and out and the handrail to the staircase. The floors are to be whitish with strong lines, and clothes storage boxes and domestic equipment are to be loose. The choosing and the arrangement of these clothes cabinets is up to the responsibility of the occupier. The trees in the private garden are Arcadia, which have light leafage that filters the sun in the summer and blows away early in the winter. And the single tree on the public corner is a horse chestnut, into the scent and the sight of whose flower candles the occupiers of the house. And they would ascend up a staircase behind the wall in the spring, and for those rustling leaves and fallen flowers of intricate spotting, kind of windfall green mace-like fruitlets, and the conkers or the horse chestnuts, the children could scuffle on the mound in front of the wall in the winter, or in the spring, or in the summer and the autumn. Well, when I first saw this house, I was sort of struck by it, and I thought that here is a kind of relationship between man-made and nature, between something old and something new, between a kind of private domain and a public domain. It's the only entrant which is an architectural statement of a very subdued, low-key nature. It is partly hidden, partly visible. It's related to the intersection and yet apart from it. It's talking about nature and the movement of the sun around. It opens out and yet it has a life within. The way in which the square is cut away on the ground level, on the east side for the morning light, and I'm sorry, on the upper level on the east side, and on the ground level plan where it's cut and yet covered in terms of the evening terrace. It remains an idea on one level, a diagram of a house, because there are no walls, there are no partitions. It doesn't tell you how someone would live there. It leaves that up to the occupants. On the other hand, it's specific. It's specific in its conditions. It's specific in its statement about its presence in a particular place. As you'll see when I show you the rest, it's unique in that it stands out because it is a very beautiful house, and at the same time, it is an idea about building as well as being specific. Have the next two, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Now, the most beautiful drawing by far, and the one which I immediately reacted to in a positive way, is the entrant, which, let's see, who is this by? Oh, by Peter Cook and Christine Hawley. And I had thought that and I was very upset to hear that these weren't the original drawings, because when I saw them, and these slides are really not as good as they should be. They're absolutely of incredible beauty, and I thought that these were original, and then Peter told me that they weren't, that these were some photographic process. But here, this is the Appia House in Rome, and the site, this too has a specific site, is along the Via Appia at Rome, and there are relics, from the relics there lie two paths, and emanating from these relics and passing a series of created relics that at the same time are an anticipation of future architecture. Now, axis A here runs upwards towards a place where one can look at the countryside and contemplate. And axis B, which comes through here in section. The two axes are perpendicular to one another, axis B and axis A. Axis A going up and axis B coming to through a portal and ramping up. The ramp is placed as a small reminder of the heroic period of modern architecture, and the arc relic is surely a portal to the new building. And these are the only reminiscences of an inherited architecture. I don't know what the symbols are here. There are attempts, I guess, Peter says, to suggest that place and object are in a constant state of mystery. One part of the building melts into another. Elsewhere, the path accentuates the formal and the atmospheric differences. The arbor contains chambers, maybe. The grotto is not an aformal, spooky place, but simply an alternative formalism, and the chamber is a model of one's ideal architecture, without rigidity of things that people like me talk about, like windows and doors and walls. The rack area is a passive, active, historical, sculpturesque. I don't know what it is. It's an intersection as an intersection of questions. Questions which we ask ourselves about the symbolism and the vocabulary of architecture. And our own attempt makes further relics to be picked over. I found this as actually a number of the entries I felt were direct criticisms of my own work, but I found that perhaps the most rewarding part of being the judge here. Because I looked at this and I said that this is an absolutely beautiful way from where one goes to where I don't know what it's made of. I don't care. I don't know what happens in those spaces. But the poetry of it and the manner of expression was one which I couldn't help reacting strongly to. And really fades into the dusk. I found this series of drawings to be, perhaps for me, more convincing than the plans, which started to be so much more specific. And I, wondered about certain things, because the idea seems to have a more non-specific form, rather than bathroom and kitchen and garage and balcony and places for bed. So I guess this is one of the problems when you say house, that it has to become a space which is labeled, whether in fact one actually puts a bed there or not. That you have to say this is a place for the bed, this is a place for the study, this is a place for balcony. Because for me, the quality of this is something which is at one time there and another time not there. In the same way one would have thought that the organization, which one might see here, might have a similar quality. Another second prize is Akio Kawasaki from Japan. And when I saw this, I said, oh my God, the power of publication. This is a white and gray house, a house for an intersection. And I have to tell you, there are many entries which seem to reflect far too literally what had just come out in magazines. This house took what had come out in magazines and really made it into something else. It took what I thought was a rather uninteresting article, so the conference in California was interesting, somehow making it an issue for me wasn't very interesting, but it took all the publications of kind of white and gray confrontation which existed at UCLA, must be 2 years ago, and made it into a polemical situation, which in fact is quite interesting. It's a kind of confluence of Palazzo Massimo and the Parthenon, and placed in a way where the Palazzo Massimo still turns the corner, and the Parthenon then bisects it and comes through into it. There's a street for pedestrians, and it's really a totally pedestrian scheme because he's blocked up the street, of course. And he sort of made it a way through. I don't know from where to where. It probably doesn't matter. Thought that the nature of it wasn't equal, since he's sort of bisecting it with a priority direction along one diagonal axis and turning the corner in another way. But that's a detail and not too important. The second place is Ray Abraham, a house with two horizons. One horizon, which is the ground level moving through, and the other horizon, the heavens, which exist within the clouds. I don't think that this slide does justice either to the drawing, which is an incredibly beautiful black and white drawing, and in which this intersection is kind of between heaven and earth and nowhere, just out wherever you might like. Someone said to me that surely I had written this program after Peter Eisman was here in London and talked about his house, which he is doing somewhere in Michigan, or I guess it's in Michigan. Well, I thought about that, and I said, well, maybe it had something to do with it, but it certainly wasn't influential. The last second place winner, however, is Peter Eisman, who has done a house which is really a house of 5 intersections, and which I tried not to give it any prize, but I like the house very much. I think it's very thoughtful, and I think that it seems to be, for me at least, very appropriate to this particular problem. Eisman talks about the intersection between the urban and the rural. He talks about the intersection between the collective and the individual, the intersection of architecture and habitation, the intersection of architecture and geometry, and architecture as the manifestation of the unconscious. I have some difficulties with the last part. I also have some difficulties with the differentiation between architecture and simply geometry. But most important, I think that architecture is a manifestation of the conscious, and I think that everything in this design is very consciously contrived, or done. It's a house in which one would expect that you move through, as you see in this diagram. Actually, what happens is you drive around and into one of these components, which is the garage and other things, I don't know what. But once within the house, the organization of the house and the forms of the house really revolve about this intersection. Now, I think it's the most difficult problem to solve because he's also dealing with, whereas almost everyone else who tried to deal with an intersection in this way were bright enough to do it on one level. They realized that once you try to deal with multi-levels within that space, you've destroyed the intersection. Eisman is trying to do that. He's trying to move vertically, not in each component of the square individually, but to move vertically in through here and maintain the integrity of this space in the middle. I think that he's getting there. Concerned with the way in which light comes into the spaces as a way of moving form. Well, this is one panel, which in slides was broken down into two, by Carlos Video and Elizabeth Dillard from New York, and it's a Villa Rotunda. And it's a Villa Rotunda, as you see here, in relation to the Shenzi. And the intersection is a reworking of the site at the Villa Rotunda and a kind of manipulation of the area around it in a whole series of sections. One has to really see this at a larger scale. Richard Reed did, from England, did a house for civilization, a house for an intersection, which is upside down, sorry, on this side, but which is impacted both upside down. But 85% of it is really an analysis of various buildings dealing with the problem of intersection. It might be worth turning it around. Maybe which one is this one? And what I found was interesting about this was really the analysis portion, because it's not until he gets down here toward the end that he has his proposal. Okay, yeah. What he's done is sort of go through history in terms of movement, intersection, development of a particular intersection. Okay, it turns around. I'm sorry.
Which one?
This is the bottom. This is his portion. It was for me the most in-depth analysis of trying to discover for himself what is the nature of intersection in architecture and he's dealing with references back to the Cité. He's dealing with the notion of point in the intersection, the relationship of scale, and then goes through the Renaissance concept, the Baroque concept, notions of architectural constraints, coming down through to perhaps certain ideas of form as sign, and then begins to develop his own scheme for a building which is related to a path, and then how that building will change, be altered, and modified through time. I thought it was an extremely thoughtful and well-presented documentation. Hans Urbe, who I'm sorry, I couldn't see the slides on it, but then I apologize. These are both sideways. That goes this way, this goes. Okay. Well, very briefly, he's taken Marcel Duchamp's suitcase and made a house into it. And so this is a house based on, this is called the Duchamp house, and it has nothing to do at all with intersection. But it's obviously something that he was working on. It's called the Martin Lang house, and yet is, I thought, an extremely thoughtful work, and therefore worth but unfortunately, it wasn't modified in any way to deal with the actual intersection. In a similar, I'm sorry, I forgot the third prize, the Chicken House, by Mr. S. Hall. I don't know if that's a name, from America, and Joseph Fenton from England. And I guess some of you may be familiar with this, but I must tell you that every night I would go home and chuckle about this house. It's one of the funniest works that was set to end. I think it's worth turning this one around. Is there someone here who could do that? This is upside down. The chicken house. That's this. I'm sorry. This is upside down. The chicken house deals with the concept of intersection, and it deals with the notion of amenities, and it is a house which on one side is it's a house for 5,000 chickens. And on one side, there's a kind of breeding pen. This is where the hatching takes place. The chickens then go through, after the breeding goes through, and then the hatching takes through, and then this is the feeding area. So this is the chicken level. Then I guess the eggs go upstairs.
and this becomes an omelet diner with a mezzanine kitchen. And so this is also has ecology in mind, and on the level below is a gas level where there's a manure digester and gas pumps and feeders and processing tunnels. Now the hen house is out through here and then through here. Omelet diner at this level, and where there's a running drum, which I guess also keeps certain things in motion, which run the gas levels and also help get rid of fumes out through the time. You can see here the hen house, which here I didn't know how to deal with this, quite frankly, because I thought it was extremely clever, very well presented, very well worked out, and at the same time was somewhat, although for chickens, it really had no overriding implication other than that although we have also procreation involved. Oh, well, okay. I had to show this because one of the things which happened, there was an A+U issue on some of my work, which I guess came out in Japan a few months before it gets to it. And Japanese students seized upon this as a vehicle for making many entries. There were literally dozens and dozens of manipulations of the Smith house or the Douglas house. The best was by Yoichi Dio and 6 other people, which is called A House for an Urban Intersection. And no, that's not good. Yeah, it is. Which is taking the Douglas house and the Pound Ridge house and the Smith house and taking all of the elements and distorting them and really actually coming up with a nice house. Many of the others, were really rather banal, but this makes something new out of something which I thought was relatively old. But it sort of takes it and collages that house into like a totally new thing, which is a triangular house. Well, this is the Douglas house, in which case there's one side which is totally closed, the private side, and the other side which is totally open, and it really takes the same ideas in terms of openness and closure between public and private, which is in this way. We manipulated them in a way and took very literally some of the things that I said in brief, where I talked about the thing I mentioned, site program, all those things. And came up with a house which was not orthogonal, which dealt with diagonal configurations, and which uses some of the same elements, but really in a totally different way. As I said, it's by far the best of many countries. This is upside down.
Isn't that you said it?
I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's Gene Sillett and Peter Wilson, and it's a house generated by the sundial, and it's also another one of the English entries, which was very well presented, dealt with a kind of whole layer of movement through into the building, through the building, into the path of the sun as it moves around. There was also another, this is one of the 5/4 place entrance. There's also another entry by Piero Frasinelli from Italy, which was a pyramid, a city, Villa Savoy, and machines. It was all written. I'm not going to read it today, but it's about 40 pages. And he said in the beginning that he sorry that his cultural situation didn't permit him to make any drawings at the present time. This is all he was capable of doing. And immediately I was turned off by that. Somehow I'm used to looking at architecture through drawings, and I wanted to see, his drawings. So one night, although I was the only judge and the jury, as I mentioned, there were many people in the room with me at all times, and whenever I would look at something, there would be 4 or 5 people sort of looking over my shoulder, assisting me in moving the drawings from one stack to another, or if I wanted to go back and look at some other things. At certain times I really wanted to be alone, but that wasn't possible unless I took things home with me back to the hotel room at night, which I did. And one night I read Mr. Frasinelli's paper, and it was really quite extraordinary. And sort of in reading it, I realized that although it was against many of the things which I really felt very strongly about, the paper, in a sense, dealt with an aspect of the problem, as I had sort of stated it. But I'm not going to, that's all I'll tell you about it right now. Now, there were 5 or 6 such entries as this one called the Accident House. This is a Japanese entry and is by Akira Akasaki and Yoshiaki Akasaki, and there must have been at least 6 such collisions. This is a collision between America and Japan, and was 2 trailers, and was one of the 4th place, one of the 4th place entrants. Adolfo Natalini sent in 3 houses. One was an intersection, kind of ceremonial intersection. Another dealt with an intersection of love, and a third with intersection with death. And also from Japan, there was a cosmic triangle, an intersection between heaven and earth in a more literal way. There was this very beautiful drawing, very interesting scheme from England, an idiosyncratic house on Hollywood Hills by Warren Chalk and I'm sorry I don't have the other person who worked. Thank you. And which I liked very much, but somehow didn't seem to get finished, unfortunately. But I mean, because I wanted to see more about it. It was very intriguing to me.
It dealt with the how does one deal with that kind of situation, and at the same time got into a kind of architecture within, but I felt never quite got finished. I guess time ran out. There was an intersection with the Great Wall of China by Sun Chang Lo of the United States, and then one of the honorable mentions by Justin Silas and Alan Berman was a house divided into 4 areas, actually making gardens and a whole world of revolving around the house and the intersection. This one is, I think, Peter Wilson from England, a house at a canal or mountain stream, and is an intersection between the two, between earth and water. And then a Japanese entrant, an underground house, and I'm sorry. This is yeah. I had these backwards. This is Peter Wilson's house at the canal. And the other one was Ferry, also from England, and I didn't put these names together by, I guess it's Perry William Zayadi from England, which is intersection. The other one was the intersection between great walls and great fluids, a similar idea. Well, that gives you some of the entrants. I'd now like to ask some of the people who are here to sort of respond or ask questions in whatever manner they like to this rather brief discussion. I'd also like to add that really Japan Architect was very kind in allowing me to bring these slides to show you today, and this is really a kind of private viewing of this work, and is not meant for any kind of reproduction in any way. As the sponsors of the competition, they have the right to first publication of all of this work, and I would be very remiss if I didn't say something to that effect.